For most people, John McEnroe will always be remembered in one frozen image. A man in a headband, a racket in his hand, eyes burning, mouth open, standing on a tennis court as if the whole world had suddenly become unfair. And then those words, "You cannot be serious." It was more than a complaint. It became a sentence attached to his name forever. 3 words that followed him from Wimbledon to television studios, from highlight reels to comedy sketches, from serious sports documentaries to casual jokes told by people who never watched a full tennis match in their lives. John McEnroe became the man who shouted, the man who argued, the man who could turn a quiet afternoon at the All England Club into a storm. And the strange thing is, the image was not completely false. He did argue. He did explode. He did challenge umpires with a fury that seemed too big for the moment. He made people uncomfortable. He made traditional tennis crowds gasp. He made officials nervous. He made opponents wonder whether they were playing against a genius, a madman, or both. But that was never the whole story. Not even close. Because behind the anger, there was something most people did not stop to notice. Fear. Not fear in the ordinary sense. Not fear of the ball or the opponent or the size of the stage. John McEnroe was not afraid of centre court. He was not afraid of Björn Borg, Jimmy Connors, Ivan Lendl, or anyone standing across the net. His fear was quieter than that. It was the fear of not being perfect, the fear of knowing exactly what he could do with a tennis racket, and still feeling that one bad call, one bad bounce, one loose game, one careless moment could take everything away. That is what people missed. They saw a man yelling at officials. They did not always see a man fighting something inside himself. McEnroe's tennis was never supposed to look normal. Even when he was young, there was something unusual about the way he played. He did not beat the ball into submission like some champions. He did not look mechanical. He did not seem built in a laboratory. He played as if the racket were part of his hand, as if the court were not a rectangle but a canvas, and he alone could see the hidden lines. A short angle here, a soft volley there, a serve that did not look powerful enough to frighten anyone, until it landed exactly where it needed to land. He was not just hitting shots, he was interrupting rhythm, he was solving people, and when he was at his best, tennis did not look like a sport in his hands. It looked like a private language. That was the part that sometimes got buried under the noise. John McEnroe was not famous only because he lost his temper. He was famous because when the temper was quiet, the talent was almost frightening. He could make the fastest players look late. He could make strong men look clumsy. He could win points before the crowd understood how he had built them. But fame is rarely fair. It chooses one part of a person and enlarges it until everything else becomes background. For McEnroe, the public chose the rage. The cameras loved it. The newspapers loved it even more. Every outburst became a headline. Every argument became a character study. Every mistake became proof that the so-called bad boy of tennis could not control himself. And maybe at times he could not. But imagine being young, gifted beyond explanation, praised for your brilliance, condemned for your behavior, and watched by millions who were waiting not only for you to win, but for you to break. That kind of attention changes a man. It can make applause feel suspicious. It can make silence feel like judgment. It can make victory feel temporary. By the early 1980s, John McEnroe was not just playing tennis. He was performing inside a cage built from expectation. Every match carried 2 questions. Would he win, and would he explode? The second question sometimes became bigger than the first, and that is where the tragedy of his image begins. Because once the world decides what you are, it rarely lets you become anything else. If McEnroe stayed calm, people called it surprising. If he smiled, people called it strange. If he showed pain, people called it drama. If he lost, they said his temper beat him. If he won, they said his temper fueled him. Either way, the anger got credit, not the work, not the loneliness, not the pressure, not the boy who had learned, perhaps too early, that talent could bring love, but never enough peace. At 67, John McEnroe is no longer the young man pacing the baseline as if the court owes him an explanation. His hair has changed. His body has changed. His voice carries a different weight now. He sits in commentary booths, speaks with experience, laughs at himself more than he once did, and looks back at a career that was both glorious and costly. But when people still ask, "What happened to John McEnroe?" they are usually asking the wrong question, because nothing simply happened to him. He became famous in a way that trapped him. He became brilliant in a way that punished him. He became a champion in a sport that demanded silence from a man who had storms inside him. And for years, the public only saw the lightning. They did not ask where the storm came from. They did not ask what it cost him to live with it. They did not ask why a man who had reached the top of the world could still look in certain moments like someone trying desperately to prove he belonged there. That is the part of John McEnroe's story that matters now. Not just the shouting, not just the famous line, not just the racket, the umpire, the headlines, or the old nickname that followed him like a shadow. The real story begins before all of that, before Wimbledon, before the cameras, before the world decided he was impossible. It begins with a boy who discovered he had a gift, and then slowly learned that having a gift does not mean you know how to survive it. Long before the world called him difficult, John McEnroe was just a boy trying to understand what winning was supposed to feel like. That is the part people forget. They remember the man with the temper. They remember the arguments, the red face, the finger pointed toward the chair umpire. They remember the voice that could cut through a silent stadium. But no man becomes that intense by accident. Somewhere, long before the cameras arrived, something begins. For John, it began in a home where effort mattered, discipline mattered, results mattered. He grew up with a gift so obvious that it almost became a burden. Adults could see it, coaches could see it, other players could feel it. The ball came off his racket differently. His hands were quicker, his instincts were sharper. He could see openings before other boys even understood the point had changed. And when a child is that talented, people stop treating the gift like a miracle. They start treating it like a responsibility. Win this match, beat that player, move up, do it again, do it better. And somewhere inside that process, joy can become complicated. John did not grow up as a careless boy floating through tennis courts with a smile on his face. There was always a seriousness around him, a pressure that seemed older than he was. His father, John Sr., was demanding in the way many fathers of gifted children can be demanding. Not always cruel, not always loud, but present. Watching, expecting, and expectations can be heavier than shouting. A father does not have to say, "You disappointed me," for a son to feel it. Sometimes it is in the silence after a match. Sometimes it is in the drive home. Sometimes it is in the way praise comes with a correction attached to it. Good win, but you should have closed it earlier. Nice shot, but you got lazy in the second set. You won, but why did you make it so hard? For a boy like McEnroe, those words did not just pass through him. They stayed. He was not built to shrug things off. That became clear later, in front of the world, but it was probably true much earlier. Every mistake seemed to touch something deep. A missed volley was not just a missed volley. A bad call was not just a bad call. A lost game was not just part of the match. It felt personal, it felt like proof. And that is a dangerous way to grow up with talent. Because talent brings attention, but it does not bring peace. Talent can win tournaments. It can open doors. It can make adults speak about your future as if it has already been decided. But talent cannot teach a young person how to feel enough. John kept winning, and still, the hunger did not go away. That was the strange punishment of his gift. Victory gave him relief but not satisfaction. Losing brought shame, but winning did not always bring happiness. It simply reset the pressure for the next match, again, again, again. By the time he stepped into the larger world of tennis, he was already carrying an invisible scorecard no crowd could see. On one side were the trophies, the rankings, the applause, the headlines. On the other side were the mistakes only he remembered, the matches that slipped, the moments he could have handled better, the approval he wanted but never fully trusted. People later said he was angry at umpires. Maybe sometimes he was. But often, it seemed as if he was angry at the gap between what he was and what he believed he should be. That gap followed him everywhere. It followed him into junior tennis. It followed him into college. It followed him onto the professional tour. It sat beside him during changeovers. It whispered after victories, it screamed after defeats, and the world saw only the explosion. They did not see the boy beneath it. The boy who had learned that being great was not the same as feeling loved. The boy who could make a tennis ball obey him, but could not quiet the voice inside his own head. The boy who was praised by strangers, feared by opponents, criticized by newspapers, and still somehow felt he had not done enough. That was the wound hidden inside the champion, and in time, that wound would become part of his game. The tragedy of John McEnroe's reputation is that the noise sometimes buried the beauty. People who only remember the arguments may never understand what he really was on a tennis court. They may remember the shouting before they remember the hands. They may remember the chair umpire before they remember the angles. They may remember the temper before they remember that, for a few years, John McEnroe played tennis as if he had found a hidden door inside the game. He did not look like other champions. That was the first thing. Some great players announced themselves with force, big shoulders, heavy legs, violent swings, the kind of power that makes the ball sound different when it leaves the racket. McEnroe was not built like that. His game was not muscular in the obvious way. He did not overwhelm people by crushing the ball again and again until they broke. He did something stranger. He made the court feel smaller for himself and larger for everyone else. A normal player saw a line. McEnroe saw 3 inches inside the line. A normal player saw a volley. McEnroe saw a question. A normal player tried to hit through an opponent. McEnroe tried to take time away from him, breath away from him, comfort away from him. There was an old-fashioned grace to his tennis, but it was not soft. It could feel soft for 1 second, then cruel the next. He could float a ball so gently over the net that it looked harmless, and by the time the opponent started running, the point was already gone. He could step forward after a serve and arrive at the net like he had been invited there by the ball itself. Nothing looked forced. That was the genius. His serve was one of the strangest weapons in tennis. It did not have the huge, clean, textbook look people expected. His body turned awkwardly. His motion seemed personal, almost improvised. But the result was deadly. Left-handed slice, disguise, placement. The ball would skid away, pull the opponent off balance, and then McEnroe would be there, already closing in, racket out front, eyes alert. He did not need a cannon. He needed half a step. And once he had that half step, he could ruin you. At the net, he was different from almost everyone. He did not punch volleys like a man trying to prove strength. He absorbed the ball, redirected it, killed it softly. Sometimes he barely seemed to touch it. The racket face would open, the ball would die, and the crowd would react a moment late because what he had done looked too simple to be legal. That was the strange cruelty of his talent. He made impossible things look casual. And because they looked casual, people sometimes forgot how difficult they were. There are players who build points with discipline, players who repeat patterns until the opponent finally cracks. McEnroe built points like conversations. He asked something with the serve. He interrupted with the volley. He changed tone with a drop shot. He ended the sentence before the other man could answer. This was why he was brilliant in both singles and doubles. Doubles revealed something about him that singles sometimes hid. In doubles, there is less space, less time, less room for ego. You have to feel movement before it happens. You have to understand where your partner is, where the opponent wants to go, and where the ball should be before the ball even arrives. McEnroe was born for that kind of chaos. His hands, his anticipation, his instinct at the net, they were almost unfair. He could play beside another person and still seem to control the whole geometry of the court. But singles was where the world judged him, and in singles he became not only great but historic. By 1984, John McEnroe had entered that rare place where an athlete is no longer simply winning matches. He is shaping the season around himself. Every tournament seemed to ask the same question. Who can stop him? Not who can compete with him, not who can irritate him. Who can actually stop him? That year, for long stretches, the answer was almost no one. He moved through matches with a sharpness that made opponents look delayed, as if they were seeing the play 1 second after he had already imagined it. He won on grass, he won on hard courts. He carried himself with that tense, electric confidence of a man who knew he was playing the best tennis of his life, and also knew that nothing not even greatness, felt safe in his hands. There was beauty in that season, and danger, because McEnroe's genius was never separate from his sensitivity. The same nerve endings that allowed him to feel the ball so delicately also made him feel every injustice, every error, every shift in momentum, as if it were a personal attack. His gift gave him control over the court, but not always control over himself. That is what made watching him so unforgettable. He was not a machine. He was too alive for that, too reactive, too exposed. When he played well, it seemed like the sport had finally found its most natural artist. When he unraveled, it seemed like the same gift that made him brilliant was burning him from the inside. And maybe that is why people could not look away. Because John McEnroe was not just winning points. He was revealing himself point by point. Every touch showed his imagination. Every argument showed his wound. Every victory showed his greatness. Every eruption showed the cost of carrying that greatness inside a mind that never truly rested. The fury made headlines, but the genius made the legend. And for a time, that genius looked strong enough to conquer everything, even himself. But then came the match that stayed with him longer than almost any trophy ever could. There are losses a player forgets. A bad day, a tired body, a court that never felt right. You shake hands, you leave, and after a while the match becomes just another line in the record. But some losses do not leave. They follow you. For John McEnroe, Roland Garros in 1984 became that kind of memory. He arrived in Paris playing the finest tennis of his life. Everything around him suggested that he was ready to do something extraordinary. He was not just winning, he was controlling matches with the confidence of a man who could see the ending before anyone else. The clay, once thought to be less natural for his serve and volley game, had not broken him. He had adapted, he had fought, he had reached the final, and across the net stood Ivan Lendl. Lendl was different from Borg, different from Connors. He was cold in another way. Heavy shots, long rallies, patience that could feel almost cruel. He did not need to charm a crowd. He did not need to look beautiful. He simply stayed there, hitting, waiting, wearing a man down. At first, McEnroe seemed to have him. 2 sets up, close enough to touch history, close enough to believe the French Open, the one major that would have changed the shape of his legacy forever, was finally coming into his hands. But tennis is cruel because it gives a man time to think, and slowly the match shifted. Not all at once, not like a door slamming, more like a shadow moving across the court. A missed chance here, a longer rally there, Lendl growing stronger, McEnroe growing tighter, the crowd changing, the air changing. The match that had looked like a coronation became a test of nerves. And McEnroe, who could command a ball with frightening delicacy, could not command the storm inside himself. Lendl came back, McEnroe lost. And years later, the wound still felt different from other defeats, because it was not just that he had been beaten. It was that he had been so close, so painfully close. He had seen the door open, stepped toward it, and somehow watched it close in front of him. That loss did not erase his greatness, but it marked him. Because sometimes the match that defines a champion is not the one he wins. Sometimes it is the one he spends the rest of his life trying to understand. There was one man who seemed to bring out everything John McEnroe was, Björn Borg. The name alone changes the temperature of the story. Borg was silence, McEnroe was sound, Borg was stillness, McEnroe was electricity. Borg looked as if nothing could reach him. McEnroe looked as if everything reached him at once. And maybe that is why their rivalry became more than tennis. It felt like a collision between 2 ways of surviving pressure. Borg hid the storm behind calm eyes. McEnroe threw his storm into the open and dared the world to look away. At Wimbledon in 1980, they gave tennis one of those matches people do not simply remember. They pass it down. Like a story, like a warning, like proof that sport, at its highest level, can make time slow down. Borg won that day, McEnroe lost. But something strange happened in defeat. John did not become smaller. He became more real to the public. They had seen the anger before. They had seen the attitude, but now they saw the fighter. They saw a young man refusing to disappear against a champion who seemed almost untouchable. And then, 1 year later, McEnroe came back. Wimbledon, 1981. Same grass. Same tension. Same opponent. But a different ending. This time McEnroe won. He took the crown from Borg, and with it, he took his place at the center of tennis. Yet even in victory, there was something complicated in him. That was always the pattern. Winning did not make him simple. Winning did not make him peaceful. It only proved, for a little while, that the fire had a purpose. Years later, the strangest part of that rivalry was not the rivalry itself. It was the friendship that grew after it. Two men who had once stood across from each other as symbols, ice and fire, eventually understood each other as men. Maybe because both knew what it meant to be trapped inside an image. Borg was never just calm. McEnroe was never just angry. They were both carrying something. The public sees trophies. Players remember weight. And when McEnroe left the court, the weight did not disappear. The cameras followed him home. That is where the story became harder, because a tennis court, for all its pressure, has lines. A match has rules. A scoreboard tells you where you stand. Life does not do that. Marriage does not do that. Fatherhood does not do that. His marriage to Tatum O'Neal placed him inside another kind of spotlight. She had grown up famous too. She knew what cameras could do to a person. She knew how childhood attention could become adult pain. From the outside, they looked like two people who should have understood each other perfectly. But understanding someone's damage does not always mean you can heal it. Their relationship became public in ways that few marriages can survive easily. There were headlines, pressure, arguments, children, separation, and the slow realization that fame does not protect a family from ordinary heartbreak. Sometimes it makes that heartbreak louder. For McEnroe, the pain of those years was different from losing a match. A match ends. You shake hands. Even if it haunts you, it belongs to the past. But the pain of family continues. It changes shape. It comes back in memories, in custody battles, in quiet guilt, in birthdays, in old photographs, in the face of a child who deserved more peace than the adults around him knew how to give. That may be the part of John McEnroe's story that makes him most human. Not the genius, not the temper, not the great victories, but the regret. Because regret is what remains when the applause is gone. A younger John McEnroe could argue with an umpire. He could blame a call. He could point to a mark on the court. He could insist that he was right and the world was wrong. But there are moments in life where there is no umpire to blame, no bad line call, no crowd to persuade, only yourself. And maybe, with age, that is the hardest opponent of all. At 67, McEnroe is not the same man the world first met. The fire is still there. It would be false to pretend it vanished. Men like him do not become completely quiet. That intensity was not a costume. It was part of his wiring, part of his gift, part of his trouble. But age has a way of changing the sound of a person. The scream becomes a story. The anger becomes analysis. The wound becomes something you can finally name. In his second marriage, with Patti Smith, there seemed to be a different rhythm. Not perfect. Life never is, but steadier. A later chapter. A chance to be known not only as the difficult genius, not only as the man who exploded, but as a husband, a father, a commentator, a musician, an art lover, a man still trying to understand what the years made of him. That is what makes his later life moving. He did not become a saint. He did not erase the past. He did not suddenly turn into someone else just because his hair changed and the stadiums grew quieter. Instead, he became something more believable. A man who survived his own intensity. A man who paid for it. A man who can look back at the younger version of himself with humor, discomfort, pride, and pain all at once. And maybe that is why people still care about John McEnroe. Not because he was easy to love. He was not. Not because he behaved perfectly. He did not. People care because he showed something raw that most of us spend our lives trying to hide. The need to be right. The fear of being wrong. The hunger to be seen. The shame of being too much. The ache of wanting love and not always knowing how to receive it. John McEnroe's legacy is not only written in titles, rivalries, or famous matches. It is written in contradiction, beauty and rage, genius and regret, victory and restlessness. A man who could touch a tennis ball like an artist, then turn around and fight the whole world over a single call. But when all the noise fades, one truth remains. John McEnroe was never just the angry man on the court. He was a boy who wanted to be enough, a champion who never felt safe inside greatness, a father who learned that the hardest losses do not happen in stadiums, and an older man still standing, still speaking, still carrying the fire, but no longer letting it be the only thing people see.